For freedom is not fruitless, but prolific of higher things. Being the most sacred aspect of woman's freedom, voluntary motherhood is motherhood in its highest and holiest form. It is motherhood unchained, motherhood ready to obey its own urge to remake the world. The early 20th century was a time when sexuality was taboo and Victorian ideals were still followed. Ideas began to change and progressivism took charge. This era was filled with economic and social reforms, and with progressive presidents like Theodore Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson, change came to politics, cities, workers, and women. In 1920, the 19th Amendment guaranteed women's suffrage and was a milestone achievement for the women's rights movement. With this progress came the fight for birth control, which at that time was almost impossible to obtain. Doctors were not open to talk about sex, keeping women from necessary information about their bodies and ways to prevent pregnancy. Margaret Sanger recognized this problem and decided to take a stand. By distributing information to doctors, scientific communities, and women, Margaret Sanger took a stand against societal norms and laws concerning sexual health. Although her views still remain controversial because of her affiliation with eugenics, the Planned Parenthood Federation of America, contraceptive availability, and the reproductive rights that have followed prove that Margaret Sanger's stance has had a lasting effect in not only the United States, but also throughout the world. Victorian principles declared sex as scandalous and unacceptable for anything other than reproduction. Most of society followed these rules by keeping information on sexuality a secret. One man who notably took part in this was Anthony Comstock, a United States postal inspector, politician, devout Catholic, and adversary of Margaret Sanger's, who was on an anti-obscenity crusade. He declared contraceptives as lewd, immoral, and promoting promiscuity. He drafted an anti-obscenity bill for Congress that included a ban on contraceptives, which passed in 1873 and became known as the Comstock Act.
And the law effectively criminalized contraception. It made it against the law to distribute literature about contraception and class that literature as obscene literature. And it also made it illegal to send them through the mails, which is a common way that people would obtain contraception.
Margaret Sanger was an influential activist who began the birth control movement. Her determination and courage allowed her to stand up for what she believed in. Her stance on the availability of birth control was grounded in deeply personal and professional experiences. One of 11 children in a poor Irish Catholic family in upstate New York, Sanger attributed her mother's premature death to an extreme number of pregnancies and miscarriages. Seeing her mother died too soon was part of her motivation to prevent the same thing from happening to other women.
So mothers died at alarming rates in the 19th century, and that was improving a little bit into the 20th century, but still, mothers were afraid of giving birth. It was a scary thing.
Sanger went on to earn a nursing degree and worked as a visiting nurse in Lower East Side, New York.
I don't like to see people suffer. I don't like to see cruelty, even to this day. And in nursing, you see a great deal of cruelty and unnecessary suffering.
While working as a nurse, Sanger saw many women who had more children than they could care for. Women frequently gave themselves back-alley abortions that caused illnesses and death. Sanger realized that women needed contraception and information about their bodies to stop this. As Sanger developed her movement, she began publishing her writings. Written and edited by Sanger, The Woman Rebel was a radical monthly she began in 1914. It advocated for working women to declare control of their own bodies. In The Woman Rebel, Margaret said, "The people are waking to the fact that there is no need for them to bring their children into the world haphazard, but that clean and harmless means are known whereby children may come when they are desired, and not as helpless victims of blind chance." Additionally, Margaret said in the November 1953 broadcast on Edward R. Murrow's This I Believe,
"Peace on earth may be achieved when children are wanted before they are conceived."
Also published in 1914, Family Limitation, a pamphlet, was all about contraception and was considered extraordinarily lewd. During the first year of printing The Woman Rebel, Margaret was arrested for obscenity. She faced 45 years in prison, so she fled to Europe. There she continued to research new methods of birth control. When she returned, the charges were dropped because she had gathered a great deal of public sympathy from not only her movement, but also the death of her 5-year-old daughter, Peggy.
And then the next major step she took was to open a clinic, which she did in October 1916 out in Brownsville, Brooklyn. And she thought this was the test case to challenge the law, which criminalized birth control.
For opening the clinic, she went to jail for 30 days. Even though she was in jail, she continued to spread information to anyone that would listen. In 1917, she began a new monthly, the Birth Control Review, which was the successor of the Woman Rebel. While trying to gain support from doctors, Sanger got mixed up in the very controversial subject of eugenics. Gloria Steinem notes in her 1998 essay for Time magazine, Sanger adopted the mainstream eugenics language of the day, partly as a tactic, since many eugenicists opposed birth control on the grounds that the educated would use it more. Though her own work was directed toward voluntary birth control and public health programs, her use of eugenics language probably helped justify sterilization abuse. Early American eugenicists despised Sanger and her work. However, the 1930s introduced new leaders of the eugenics movement, such as Frederick Osborne. He was anxious to cooperate with birth controllers in spreading contraception among the poor.
And that's where she got a lot of her support, because eugenicists were for birth control. And so she was trying to get support, wherever she could.
With the help of her growing assistants, Sanger organized the American Birth Control League in 1921. The goal was to create a national organization present in all states to lobby for the legalization of contraception and promote women's health and reproductive rights. In 1942, the ABCL became the Planned Parenthood Federation of America. By creating a national organization, women across the country were able to acquire the same information and care Sanger fought for in New York City. The 1936 court case, U.S. v. One Package of Japanese Pessaries, was a major win for Sanger and her movement. The ruling from this case was especially important because it gave physicians the right to import birth control and legalize the distribution of contraceptives for medical use. Without this case, the chain reaction in liberalization of the Comstock laws would have been delayed for many years. This adjustment allowed Sanger to run clinics with doctors who could legally educate about and prescribe birth control. Margaret Sanger is a tremendously important figure in history because she took a stand by defying what was unjust. She was able to see one of her main goals achieved in 1957 when the Comstock Act was repealed, although it has been a continuous battle since.
It's a long period of time to fight for something that you're coming up against a lot of opposition with. And she was willing to put her shoulder to the wheel and keep that process moving forward.
Margaret Sanger's stand has had a lasting impact across the world. Organizations like Planned Parenthood continue to fight for reproductive rights in the United States and internationally. Planned Parenthood provides birth control, STD screenings, abortions, general health care for men and women, and so much more. Even though they do a lot of good for people, Planned Parenthood is remarkably still under attack. Opponents of Planned Parenthood are looking to modify reproductive rights and defund programs, which would revoke what Margaret Sanger fought for so many years. As Gloria Feldt said in the New York Times, the current struggle over birth control, abortion, and sex education make clear that courageous actions like Sanger's are as necessary now as they were 100 years ago. Her vehement spirit and will urged her to fight for what was crucial to her beliefs.
She was very feisty and no nonsense and direct.
Her work gave women the power and ability to have some control in their lives. Women were less oppressed and had more of a voice in society. The work of her movement inspired court cases like Eisenstadt v. Baird in 1972 and Roe v. Wade in 1973 that granted women more liberties. The creation of the birth control pill was also inspired by Sanger's work. Margaret Sanger worked alongside Gregory Pincus, John Rock, and Catherine McCormick to encourage the development of the pill. Today, contraception is legal, but Margaret Sanger's work continues through a fight that is far from over.